The three of us departed Ux's quarters and made our way to the nearest subway terminal. This time we rode the heavy shuttle on the top level of the gravity train. Since this trip was in the daylight period, I got a good view of the park. There were dozens of humans, including kids enjoying the small slice of recreated outdoors. We arrived at the subway dock a few minutes before the next car arrived. There were 5 others already waiting, so Ux took me around on a meet and greet. She knew virtually everyone here on Vesta, as it was a fairly small community. The others were polite and kept to their questions impersonal and brief, despite their obvious curiosity over my lost decade. Soon enough, the subway car arrived, and we boarded. The acceleration couches, now deceleration couches for this trip, had been configured to face aft, and I climbed into an empty one by Ux. The hatch sealed, and our car started to be lowered out of the gravity train's docking well and down onto the magnetic subway tracks located in an extended trench carved into the outer wall of the huge toroidal tunnel. A slight hum grew as the magnetic brakes activated and began to slow our car from its current 600 km/h speed down to 0 relative to Vesta. As it did, I grew lighter and lighter, and the couch slowly rotated so the new low-gravity down pointed towards the center of the asteroid. Finally, we arrived and stopped moving at the low-G terminal end of the ride. Omu was already moving and helped unstrap and pull me from the car. We waited for the other passengers to leave before us, as they were likely in more of a hurry. Once the terminal was empty, Omu helped me along as we followed Auxe down a series of corridors until we came to one of the main radial tunnels heading inwards towards the central spaceship construction bay. The distance to the construction yard was just over 1 kilometer, so we used mag plates to pull us quickly down the corridor. The plates rode along magnetic tracks set into the tunnel's mostly circular sidewalls. A spidery mobile unit grabbed me and gently positioned my back against one of the wall plates. I felt active tethers on the plate attach themselves to the tabs on the back of my shirt. Another tether wrapped around my lower legs and held them securely as the unit verbally reminded me to keep my arms tight to my side. Now securely attached to the mag plate, I felt like a taxidermy display mounted to a wall plaque. Thankfully, the position was not uncomfortable in the asteroid's ultra-low gravity. The mag plate started accelerating down the tunnel heading towards the central construction complex. I would estimate my top speed was less than 20 km/h, but I was still thankful for the small windscreen that had wrapped around my head and face all the same. I glanced behind me and saw that Ux and Omu were riding their own wall plates and were holding formation. There were 8 tracks arranged around the circular sides of the tunnel. Half were colored red, which meant they were devoted to travel in the opposite direction. I met one of the return plates in use as it flew by fast enough that I could barely make eye contact with its rider. The journey seemed quick, or more likely I was too thrilled by the ride to notice the few minutes it must have taken. My mag plate started to slow as it approached the inward enlarged end of the corridor. When the plate came to a full stop, my tethers were released and I floated down to the flattened floor section of the tunnel. I pulled myself into a side alcove chamber to clear the area so the waiting mobile unit could transfer my plate to the outgoing side of the tunnel and take on returning passengers. Omu and Ux soon joined me in the alcove, and we continued our journey inward on foot. We were now entering a higher security area which included enhanced oversight from Ganossium AI. His use of a synthetic male voice caused humans to refer to it that way, was the AI in charge of the design and construction of the interstellar colonizer starships and all related technologies. The AI also acted to oversee humanity's exodus from Sol system and its successful colonization of the nearby stars. We passed through the first of 2 sets of pressure doors, and in the process were scanned by the AI. "Welcome to the main construction docks, John. You are fully cleared to access all areas," the synthetic deep male voice said. It had not addressed Uxe or Omu, the former likely being a known daily visitor, while the latter was probably contacted digitally via the area network. The airlock doors behind us sealed shut, and the next set opened. We entered the main lobby of the Starship construction yard site offices. Off to one side were break rooms and meeting areas. I spotted a dozen humans in various states of virtuality or in actual face-to-face discussions. Ahead was a large wall of glass, and beyond that, illuminated by many bright spotlights lining the kilometer-wide shaft, were the visible portions of Gambado, humanity's 4th interstellar starship and colonizer. I made my way to the window and took in its glory. Oh my God, she was big. Much bigger than her predecessors. The gigantic ship filled a good portion of the shaft beyond the glass. I looked down to see that the construction shaft extended towards the center of the asteroid many additional kilometers before being obscured by equipment, and that the vessel filled a good third of the visible depth. Looking up, I could see the underside of the inner of the two main inflated spheroidal hatches separating the dock from the vacuum of space. The construction shaft beyond the window was under a partial pressure with an atmosphere of mostly argon. This aided in the manufacturing efforts by preventing vacuum bonding and allowing for simple traditional welding instead of by electron beam. Humans could function just fine in the low-pressure environment without a suit, but would need to have a reliable supply of breathing oxygen. I found myself comparing the Gambado to the earlier ship that I had been heavily involved with. That ship had been the Averill, the first starship humans had constructed. This vessel had to be at least 6 times larger and many more times massive than that vessel, and I was surprised that my pride suffered from it. Yux came to stand next to me and held my hand as Ganassim AI began explaining the various parts of the ship in our view. My smart irises activated and began to show an overlay of data that matched the AI's description. I learned that the bow's massive bulbous shape, visible directly in front of us, contained the integral impact shielding and also the deployment mechanisms for the deployable leading shield discs. The bulk of the space below the armored nose was tankage spaces, which contained the carbon feedstock used to manufacture the graphene shield discs themselves. The AI explained that Gambado had enough carbon reserves to recreate its full fleet of shield discs 6 times over, or thrice the number expected to be needed for its interstellar flight. The minimum of twice was because one set was needed during the launching phase, while the second was deployed during the coast phase. The first set was kept ahead of the accelerating vessel by launching laser pressure passing through the main vessel's photon sail by Fresnel lens ports. The lenses adjusted the force of the lasers to both steer and maintain the graphene shields at the proper distance ahead of the Gambado to intercept high-energy debris or particles. Luckily, these were few, as the powerful laser beams coming from Sol did a fair job of clearing the vessel's path. The second set was deployed during the vessel's long coast period. It should last the entire coast phase of the mission unless the vessel needed to alter course. In that case, further sets would need to be created. After the coast phase, the disc would no longer be needed, as the high-powered gamma exhaust would blast a lane clear once the deceleration positron engines were lit. The nose area also contained the triplicated and armored snouts of the debris rejection lasers. These were the powerful beams that would disintegrate or deflect any objects too large to be fully stopped by the leading fleet of shield discs. Ganasium moved its explanation downward along the visible portion of the vessel. Slightly below the level of our observation window was the forward reserve hydrogen tank. This was a central rigid spherical mass over 100 meters in diameter. This lower half of the sphere and the long trunk below were surrounded by multiple torus-shaped balloon tanks. These tanks were currently empty and were in their shrunken, stowed configuration, which allowed us glimpses of the vessel's inner trunk truss structure. There, inside the main truss, were the shielded crew and biosuspension areas. Far below the balloon tanks was another large, rigid, spherical hydrogen tank. Its large, round bulk hid the remaining lower parts of the ship from our view. "Come, John," Ux said, pulling me gently by my hand. She led me to a small airlock chamber off to the side where a small aerial pod was docked. The three of us passed through the airlock and into the pod's interior. The pod resembled a bloated version of my aircraft Huss, except that there were no seats. The pod also had much smaller lift fans at its corners, as larger fans were not needed in the faint gravity of Vesta. I strapped my legs to the floor of the pod next to Ux near the front window. Omu grabbed a handhold behind us after manually sealing the pod's aft hatch. Ganassim must be controlling the pod as we detached from the wall of the construction yard almost instantly. The small lift fans whirred in the partial argon atmosphere, and we began to gently spiral down in a clockwise direction, while simultaneously moving closer to Gambado. I smiled as we passed a human in a wingsuit flapping along. He or she was glowing like a firefly with the suit's flashing illuminators as, despite the spotlights, the yard was very dark in some areas. Ux relayed that the wingsuits were a good way to get exercise, and the exposure to the large open spaces in the yard helped counteract the claustrophobic smaller spaces through much of the asteroid complex. The flyer did a quick loop around us and waved as we dropped by. Up close, the interstellar vessel was even more impressive. We were dwarfed by the hydrogen tankage toroids as we passed by them at 20 meters distance. As we came around the far side of the interstellar vessel, I noted 4 other smaller vessels under construction. I pointed these out to Uxa. Those are 4 new torch ships under construction. Stellux AI shares this yard with Ganaseum because of the yard's large physical size and the high metal output from the mines deeper below. There is an excess of construction capacity here, especially now that the bulk of Gambado's structure is finished, she explained. We continued our spiraling descent and now passed the bottommost spherical tank. Below that tank was an enormous grid of lattice braces. The empty lattice frames would later hold the specialized ESUs that stored the positrons. These were currently near Mars orbit, where a large space-based solar array drove the many particle accelerators which were creating the positrons. Only in the final weeks before the eventual launch of Gambado would those ESUs be brought on board. Yes, we had made them safer than ever, but still, accidents could happen. Below the currently empty positron storage lattice were the normal electron ESUs. These were already stacked in their very dense final configuration. These would be slowly charged by Vesta's abundant fusion power plants via portable det units. There were too many to count as we dropped past them. Next came the intricate miracle of the main positron and electron annihilation engines. Gambado had 3 of the drives, and they would mostly be used for the deceleration phase of her journey. Each was mounted around a strong-looking central truss, and were each angled a few degrees outwards from the center line of the interstellar vessel. This allowed the final lower tip of the ship to be armored against deceleration debris. This area was also where the bulk of construction was happening and was surrounded by hundreds of busy mobile units and active work platforms. My smart irises activated to filter out the harsh light of too many welding units in action in the area. It looked like much of the current work was focused on the huge molten metal spray radiators. I asked the AI about the construction activities. We have recently developed new technologies which harness a higher percentage of the waste heat produced by the annihilation engines, John. This will permit a 4% reduction in the size of the main radiator assemblies. The overall efficiency gains will allow a reduction of travel time of 3 years, Ganaseum explained. The AI followed on with more technical details, which I mostly ignored. As we were now near the aft end of the main vessel, there were large radial braces extending from the sides of the construction cylinder, supporting the bulk of the vessel. I remembered the design of the previous interstellar vessels and realized that what we saw here was just the deceleration stage of Gambado. I mentioned this out loud. Ganaseum explained that the booster sections were currently under construction deeper in the yard below. There were 2 booster stages, an initial stage which would be used at the start of the voyage, and a second stage which would be used later to accelerate the craft up to nearly 9% of light speed. The first stage was a large, bulky cylinder consisting of tens of thousands of Orion-type fusion bomblets. This stage would get the vessel moving and accelerate Gambado up to almost 1% of the speed of light over the course of 2 weeks. It would then be ejected to allow the second stage to deploy. That stage was the photon sail section, which would deploy an ultra-lightweight sail many thousands of kilometers in diameter. The sail would be pushed by the thousands of high-powered launching lasers located in orbit around Mercury. This slower acceleration phase would continue for over 2 decades before being shut down and abandoned when distance finally caused the laser energy reaching the sail to drop below practical minimums. Now at its fastest speed, Gambado would travel on by coasting for the next 160 years until it approached its target star. It would then begin a 4-year-long period of deceleration using the 3 electron-positron annihilation engines which we had just observed. If all went well, these engines would bring Gambado into orbit around the K7 type star Groombridge _1618. Our telescopes had scanned the system for decades, and a possible habitable planet had been found. There were many unknowns, so the colonizer module of Gambado was larger and more flexible than those humanity had sent to other stars previously. This was due to the likelihood of harsher conditions existing in the Groombridge system. A space-based or an underground colony could be a possibility because large-scale terraforming of the already detected target planet was a likely necessity. I was distracted from studying the ongoing work on the Starship's radiators by motion coming into view from further down the construction shaft. It was a large rotating module which was revolving around the inside of the kilometer-wide cylinder at around 2 revolutions per minute. The module had suddenly flared bright orange and emitted a huge gout of smoke and steam. Had there been an accident? I pointed it out to Asay, who explained that this was just a metal foundry. The smelting process needed gravity to process their ores into refined metals, in this case titanium, and had to revolve similar to the main gravity train habitat. There were many more of the gravity smelters in operation in the deeper portions of the construction shaft, down near the bottom at the 10-kilometer depth where the mining activity was highest. The bottom of the cylinder was riddled with branching side tunnels, which led to automated mining machines that were busy hollowing out the core of the asteroid. We continued to fly lower in the cylindrical construction yard, leaving the deceleration stage of Gambato behind. I cringed slightly as we passed close by the exposed, gigantic spinning gravity train, but no more gouts of hot gases emerged. Gymnasium must have had a handle on the operations and was keeping us safe. I did observe that some of the smelter modules were hundreds of meters long and 50 meters high and resembled moving skyscrapers as they rotated by our pod just a few dozen meters away. I could now see the heavy automated ladles pouring molten metal into large vats of the extrusion machines. The argon atmosphere here became very hazy from the venting smelter gases, and I saw that the clouds were moving. Instead of slowly rising, they were being drawn into large vents ringing the cylinder of the yard. Gymnasium explained that these led to scrubbers, busy removing the contaminants and keeping the argon purity levels high enough for production and good visibility. Our ride became bumpier as we flew through the hot gases and winds surrounding the smelter train. Soon we were below most of the heat and turbulence, and our ride became smoother. Now we were approaching the 100-meter diameter fusion bomblet Orion booster section. This cylinder-shaped module was at least half a kilometer long and had hundreds of openings which were being slowly loaded with fusion bomblets. I had once seen something similar, but many, many times smaller back on Earth. This had been at the Baltra Island launch facility, which had been under the control of the enemy AI at the time. One difference between this booster and that smaller one was that this one had gigantic physical shock absorbers and a large shield mass on its detonation end. We were dropping past these titanic structures now. The distinct color of superconducting coils surrounding the shock absorbers was apparent. They dampened the forces of each fusion explosion magnetically, transforming the newtons of sudden force into ergs of electricity while softening the blow felt by the Starship. This captured electrical energy was then used to ignite follow-on fusion bomblets, much the way a magneto energized a spark plug in an old internal combustion engine. "Where is the photon sail stage?" I asked out loud as we dropped past the huge Orion booster stage. "The second stage is being assembled in the extreme microgravity of a higher orbit around Vesta." John, Gymnasium AI explained, "Even the asteroid's extremely low gravity here would hamper the efforts to properly fold the thousands of square kilometers of molecule-thick sail into its compact launching package." We dropped deeper into the construction shaft. The open spaces became less open as more smelting and manufacturing equipment filled these areas of the yard. The diameter of the cylindrical space was also reduced to just a few hundred meters at this depth. The atmosphere was much murkier than above due to the outgassing from the smelters. My smart irises displayed radar and sonar overlays to show areas around our pod that were obscured by the fumes. We finally stopped descending after passing through the kilometer-deep maze of heavy manufacturing machinery and material transfer gondolas. A large side tunnel came into view, which we entered. After 100 meters, we came to a docking port. Our pod reversed itself and attached to the hatch. It looked like our pod ride was over. The feeling was reinforced when Gymnasium announced that we were now leaving its area of enhanced oversight. Beyond the hatch was an airlock chamber large enough for the three of us. There was an air pack unit dispenser on one wall, and Yux grabbed two. The air packs were similar to the respirator units I had worn in the past, but were a bit larger. The mine shaft beyond the next airlock is also pressurized with inert gas, John. We will need to wear these for breathing oxygen. Oomu will carry a spare in case we need a replacement, Yuk said. Oomu helped Uxie get her supply pack attached to her back before turning to help me into mine. I slipped the oxygen mask in place and felt the supply pack being attached to the tabs on the back of my shirt. In the low gravity, I hardly felt its presence. But I would have to remember it was there so as to not catch it on anything. We were also given flashlights, although Uxie said that the shaft ahead had enough ambient lighting for our smart irises to provide good vision. Beyond the airlock, the tunnel was a rough 4-meter diameter cylinder bored into the rock of the asteroid. The air pressure felt the same as the chamber we had just left, so sounds echoed normally. The tunnel was very dark, as Ux had said, and I switched to low-light vision. I saw that every 100 meters or so, there was a small glowing light source attached to the wall of the shaft. I was able to speak through the mask. Uxa, where are we going? To my main remote project sites, John. I have something I want to show you. Please be patient a while longer, she said. As we walked in silence, I saw that she was making eye contact often with Oomu and suspected they were having a subvocal chat. Oomu likely was as much in the dark about our destination as I was. After pulling ourselves down the tunnel a few 100 meters, we came to a sealed hatch. There was a large, well-lit chamber on the other side. Waiting in the chamber was a 4-meter-long, narrow torpedo-like pod. The long pod had 4 steering vanes or fins fore and aft in an X configuration, with the bottom pairs forming 4 landing skids. At the rear of the torpedo pod were contra-rotating propellers. The pod was pointing down a narrow 3-meter diameter shaft. The shaft headed off into the darkness, and I noted that it seemed to be pointed downward at a few degrees of angle. A long section of the pod's curved upper panel opened as we approached. We will have to ride this air pod to get to my experiment area, as it's far too great a distance to walk. It will be a bit of a squeeze for the 3 of us. But I think we will fit, Ux said. She pulled herself aboard the pod and slid prone into its nose. Oomu gestured for me to go next, and I crawled in behind Uxa. I had to lie on her legs, which placed my chin just above her ass. She wiggled it a bit to let me know she was aware of my position. I reached forward and gave her a hug, copying a feel as I did. Oomu squeezed in behind me, and I felt her ample bosom resting on the back of my thighs. The android also wrapped her arms around me, thankfully without copying a feel. The pod's hatch closed, sealing us inside like 3 sardines in a can. I felt the vibrations and heard the whir as the propellers spun up and began pushing us down a new shaft. The flight was smooth as the pod's control surfaces simply needed to keep us centered in the shaft. I did begin to hear wind noises coming from the front of the pod and estimated that we were traveling at a good clip. It also felt like we had turned downward and were descending deeper into the asteroid. The ride went on for 5 minutes before I asked, "How far are we going, Uxa?" "About 95 kilometers, John. It will take another 15 minutes. I'm sorry for the delay, but you will appreciate what I'm going to show you much more by seeing it in person instead of remotely." I laid my head down on her lower back, despite the fact that the faint gravity did not bother my neck muscles at all. I was silent, as was Ux, but I got the sense that she and Oomu were still occasionally speaking subvocally. While I waited, I noticed that a new option was available on my Iris's menu. It was an exterior view of our flight in the AirPod. I selected it but quickly turned it off after only a few seconds. Imagine the view from the nose of a bullet flying down the barrel of a gun. No, I'd stick to the darkness for the rest of the trip. Our speed was much faster than I had expected, and it finally sank in what Ukes had said. 20 minutes to go over 100 kilometers meant that we were flying along at over 300 kilometers per hour. In a narrow 3-meter diameter tunnel. I thought about asking Ux why she needed such a remote location, but decided to simply let her do her big reveal as she had planned. As we continued flying down the narrow shaft, I felt the sensation that we were beginning to climb upward. "Are we starting to go up?" I asked. "It feels like that, John, but the tunnel we are in was bored perfectly straight. The sense of angle change you are feeling is due to the narrow diameter of Vesta. Our starting point was about 10 kilometers below the pole of the asteroid. We left that location heading a few degrees below level from that point. As we travel, we are shooting a chord of the asteroid's radius, and the center of gravity is moving behind us. We sense that change as a gradual turning upward in our flight. She paused to let me work that out in my head. If our trip was 110 kilometers down a straight tunnel, and the asteroid only had a radius of 250 kilometers, give or take, we would run out of room quickly even with our initial descending angle. "We're going to end up near the surface, quite a distance away from the pole?" I said questioningly. "That's right, John. You nailed it. My project area is near the surface, about 130 kilometers from the pole we left from." "Do you make this trip often?" I asked. "Only once or twice a month. I can do most of my work remotely," she explained. "Through the firewall?" I felt her sudden jolt and smiled. I had shocked her pretty good with that revelation. After a long pause, she said, "Naomi?" "Yes, the AI was suspicious about why you wanted to see me in person." "Did it force its way past the firewall?" she asked. "It told me that it had not. I think I believe its answer. It suspects much, but it said that it would leave the matter up to me." There was another pause. "How do you do your work remotely if there is a logical firewall?" I asked to fill the silence. "I ran a secure optical cable back to my lab office in the Starship construction area. It has quantum protection and can't be tapped. I connect my cranial transponders directly to Truffles using the cable without worry about humans or AI's eavesdropping." I heard the torpedo pod's motor become almost silent and felt a slowing sensation. We must be nearing our destination. "Truffles?" I asked. "Yes, Truffles is the local AI I use to manage construction at this project area and also run the experiments. It exists only behind the firewall and is cut off from the greater logical network, both here on the asteroid and beyond. I am its only intermediator with the outside world. Truffles were a type of fungus." I smiled as I got it. "Kept in the dark and fed nothing but bullshit," she finished for me. "Yes, you figured it out. Well done, John." The AirPod motor went completely silent, and there soon followed a gentle bump as its skids touched down. When all motion had ceased, the pod's upper panel popped open. Omu extracted herself from behind me, this time giving me a goose as she climbed out. I did the same to Uxu when I followed the android out of the pod. I then pulled her legs, extracting her out of the nose of the AirPod. Once we were clear, we entered a side tunnel which contained another airlock. The hatch to the lock was very solid, and Ux had to enter a long code on an actual physical keyboard to get it to cycle open. Behind us, I noticed a manipulator arm carefully pick up and reverse the AirPod in the tight chamber. It set the pod down facing back down the tunnel we had just arrived from through. It looked like our way home would be another magic carpet ride. Once we were in the airlock, Ux and I swapped each other's air packs with fresh units hanging in the lock. I noticed my old one was half depleted as I hooked it to the lock's recharging manifold. Ux said it would be full when we returned to the main asteroid complex. The next hatch of the airlock cycled, and we entered Ox's secret experiment area. After passing down a short tunnel, we entered an enormous, brightly lit carved space. The walls were the original rock of the asteroid, and they still bore the signs of large mining machinery. The chamber was at least 60 meters wide, and the curved ceiling stood 20 or more meters above the flat floor. The far wall was at least 300 meters distant. I whistled to myself. This was a big space. It was mostly full too. Standing proudly on each side of a central passageway were ranks upon ranks of large ESU energy storage cylinders. They were the largest of the common ESU types, and I counted dozens of 4x6 groupings on each side of the passageway. I saw that each cluster was fed by a local attached DIT, so the chamber was getting its power from somewhere else. I did a quick estimate and realized that there were over 500 of the large ESUs here in the chamber. That represented a lot of electrical energy on tap. There were over 20 DETs providing power to recharge the ESUs. I'd never seen so many dual entangled tunnelers used in one place before. The only reason I could think of was that Ux needed to recharge the array of ESUs very quickly. I suddenly recalled the occupation of Ux's partner Rami. His expertise had been in power generation. I sensed his involvement in this place. As I slowly spun around, taking in the large chamber, I saw Ux smiling at me. I had the sudden insight that she had probably never gotten to show off her creation before. She deserved the pride she must be feeling from my amazed reaction. I noted that the DETs and the ESUs were all connected by a grid of heavy superconductor buses installed overhead and crisscrossing the room. I saw where the buses converged into massive cables, which left the chamber through its ceiling near the center. Ukes noted my gaze directed upward and said, "Yes, the main experiment is located in the chambers above us." "Where does all the power come from?" I asked. "From the fusion plants in the South Polar Crater. The shadows there allow for more efficient excess heat radiation," she explained. "Won't the Starship construction project or the main habitat miss the power?" "Well, we started building Vesta's fusion generation facilities 150 years ago. We have been adding fusion power plants slowly ever since the beginning. We have since had enough surplus power to start constructing equatorial colliders to create additional positrons and ease the strain on the Mars colliders. Even with that energy-intensive use on top of the normal construction activities on Vesta, we have enough excess capacity that the power diverted here is not missed," she explained. She directed Omu and me to a recessed area in the wall beside the airlock. The recess extended deeper and became a second tunnel, although much smaller than the main chamber ESU-filled chamber. The smaller cavern was filled with an assortment of idle mobile construction and maintenance units. I also saw a group of heavy industrial fabricators. This must be the automated workshop for construction equipment and devices needed for the experiment. Above the recess was a large open shaft leading upwards. There was a ladder along the side of the shaft, but Ukes told us we would ascend by using a hoist cable hanging nearby instead. I looked and followed the cable back up the shaft. My irises zoomed in, and over 100 meters above I could see other, heavier cables hanging from a bridge crane. With the light gravity, I would guess they could lift hundreds of tons easily. This shaft must be how all the ESUs and other equipment had gotten down here. We each pulled elastic bands over our heads and under our armpits and clipped their tethers onto various attachments along the end of the cable. Again, Ukse went first, having attached to the highest clip. Omu took the next, and I attached my tether to the last. Up they went, and with a firm tug, I joined them. With the low gravity, we did not sway very much, which eased my anxiety greatly. I ruined that by looking down to see the floor dropping away quickly. Halfway up, I saw that the shaft's construction switched from a bored rock cylinder to a smooth metal liner. "Are we going above the surface?" I asked. Omo answered before Ukes. "My inertial sensors place us 60 meters below the surface at this location, John." "Omayu is correct. When we arrive at the upper level, we will still be 10 meters below the surface. The shaft has become metal for pressure integrity reasons, as there are numerous fissures near the surface," Ukse added. The top of the shaft had a pair of large ESU-sized industrial airlocks off to one side and a smaller human-sized airlock off the other. We were now slowing and would arrive at a walkway leading to the smaller airlock. The lift cable gently came to a stop next to this walkway, and Ukse reminded me to be careful when I disconnected. Omu even provided the math. With the reduced air pressure, the fall was far enough that even with the slight gravity, a body would reach a terminal velocity of 11 meters per second on impact, or almost 50 kilometers per hour. I did notice that there were small aerial rescue units attached to the walls near the midpoint of the shaft. This meant that there was still a chance to be saved if an accidental fall happened. I decided that being careful would be more prudent than seeing if the rescue units worked. We entered the airlock at the end of the walkway and waited for it to cycle. Inside, there were two other doors, each with viewing windows. One led to a brightly lit human workspace, and the other led to a large, dimly lit technology vault. My irises allowed me to see that the vault was filled with a considerable mass of processor blocks and memory modules. I touched the door leading to the vault and found it cold. "Truffles?" I guessed out loud. A new ambiguous gender-sounding synthetic voice spoke up from a ceiling grill. "Yes, the data vault contains my main processing units. Beware, the vault is kept under an atmosphere of sulfur hexafluoride for reduced corrosion and better heat conduction. To enter, you will need a portable supply of oxygen. Note, there is no wireless access in the Skankworks." "Whom am I addressing?" "Skankworks?" I burst out laughing and looked questioningly at Ukse. "Rami's pet name for this place," she explained with a scowl. "Truffles. With me are John Abrams Prime and Omu AI. I am showing them the project. Visitors? Unprecedented. I have only basic data on John Abrams Prime and Omu AI." "Welcome," the voice said. The door leading to the human workspace opened, and Ux removed her face mask, pantomiming that I could do the same. The atmosphere is breathable in the on-site office and rest area, she explained. She had clipped her respirator mask to her shirt pocket. I stowed mine in a similar manner and moved to inspect the room. One side was clearly the working area with a large set of display screens surrounding a comfortable-looking low-G body cradle. The other side was a living area with a standard automatic kitchen unit. Beyond an open doorway, I spotted a low-G toilet complete with a watertight immersion stall. The walls had plenty of pull bars and even the ceiling had a few. Ux interrupted my inspection by offering me a bulb of coffee. While she was in the kitchen preparing our beverages, I used the low-G toilet. I was thankful to see that it also had a male urine collection tube. When I was done, I washed up and continued my tour of her workspace. In the far end of the chamber was a compact centrifuge. It was installed sideways and seemed to have a short 5-meter radius. I'd used one before for sleeping and exercising, and they were fine for short-term use, especially with a cranial implant helping to remove the disorientation caused by its short rotational radius. The auto kitchen had finished creating our coffees by now, and I joined Uxe at a pair of low-G body cradles in the living space. After tucking my ankles into the bent frame of the cradle, I sat back on the crossbar and sipped my coffee. Uxe remembered my preferences, and it had just the right amount of cream. I take it Rami named this place after the skunk works of the old era. I did not know he was a history buff, I said. I think everyone is a bit of a history buff these days, John. Rami probably learned the name while researching historic power generation methods or some other pre-reset manufacturing technology. Does he spend a lot of time here with you? I probed. He did while we were installing the power infrastructure. Not so much once the actual project got underway, as exotic physics and theory are not his preferred thing, Ux answered. He did spend a few weeks here when I had my first breakthrough. I had not left for over a month as we got close. She then turned towards our android companion. Oh, Moo, would you permit a direct linkage to Truffles? He is so out of touch with the happenings beyond the firewall and could use a good data infusion of recent events and other AI gossip. He will also provide you with details on what I have created here. Omu looked towards me. I just shrugged back. It's up to you, my friend. I'm sure you won't catch anything. I swear I saw the android roll its eyes at me. I am safe, Omu, we heard Truffles say through the room's speakers. Ux and I grinned at each other. The android agreed to the linkage, and Ux pointed to the high-bandwidth access port near her work area. Ux had said that she often linked her enhanced cranial implants directly with the AI. Omu could use the same system. We watched as the Omu approached the terminal, was there hesitation, and inserted a finger probe. There were a few seconds of silence while the two AIs interfaced. The silence was interrupted suddenly by Omu uttering, "Oh my. Don't spoil the surprise for John, please," Ux said to the android. She then smiled at me and resumed sipping her coffee bulb. We continued drinking our coffee while the two AIs continued to intimately get to know one another. Omo stood frozen, and eventually her illuminated eye representations became the circling light patterns, which indicated she was near her processing limits. Ux saw this and laughed, looking to me for an explanation. I debated on what to tell her, and in the end decided that I trusted her with my life and that she should know all. When I finished explaining what I knew, she grasped the implications of Omu's emancipation much faster than I had. She also had many good follow-on questions, which sadly I was unable to answer. I'll have to have a long chat with our android friend soon, was how we ended the subject.